Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. This is the June 26, 2025 Waseca School Board regular business meeting. It's 5:30 p.m. and we are in the Central Building, second floor conference room, and we'll start off with Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Motion to approve the agenda, please.
I'll make a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
I'll second it.
Okay, motion and a second to approve the agenda. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Recognition of visitors, don't see any. Colin, you want to come up here and we got something for you.
Well, Colin, as Chair Dunn gets your plaque out, just want to say on behalf of myself and the entire school board, we appreciate 2 years of great school board service out of you, and we just really appreciate your input and insights and what we do as a school district. You've been a valuable member of the team, so thanks so much, and we really appreciate your work.
There you go. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you for the opportunity to work with you. I had fun. So,
Good deal. Awesome.
You want to tell us what you're going to do now?
what I'm gonna do now?
I mean, after high school.
As I
Not tonight.
my story. Yeah, I'm going to Wartburg. I'm wearing the shirt. I'm going to Wartburg in the fall to study music education as of right now.
Very good.
And what would you like to do with that?
Probably high school choral director.
Oh,
That's where I'm at right now, at least.
okay.
Very good.
Well, good luck.
Awesome. Good luck. Yeah, very good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Colin.
Thanks, Colin. All right, moving on. Payment of claims. Charlie.
I have reviewed the claims and I recommend for approval the accounts payable of $1,746,330. Excuse me, I'm gonna start over. $1,746,396.24. I also recommend the payment of the dental of $18,610.36, and also the payroll of $930,743.63. I make that a motion.
Second.
Okay, motion and second for payment of claims. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Motion for consent agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion and a second to approve consent agenda. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Informational items. Dr. Hudspeth.
All right, well, good evening. Tonight there'll be two primary presentations during the information session. The first is I will work us through some work on our strategic plan area of efficient and effective use of resources, and where the facility committee has come to a recommendation to bring to the board for action tonight for the next steps on some of our facility work. Second report by Ms. Brandt will be about our preliminary budget as we consider for the next fiscal year. So Amy, do you want to bring that presentation up for the facility assessment? So we're going to start a little bit with a little bit of history, kind of where we've been the last few years when it comes to our facility proposal. So you can go to that first slide there, Amy. It'd be great. So in 2015, we did a full assessment of our facilities. That was right around the time the high school bond was passed and construction was done. So we had a full current assessment of where our buildings were throughout the district. In 2019, we partnered with Wold, who had done the project on the high school, and they refreshed our facility assessment that was done in 2015. Now that was essentially, a refresh is the right word. So they came in and they relooked at some of our systems, but primarily it was an update of the previous assessment. So we really are looking at about 10 years since our last full over comprehensive view of our buildings. In 2019-20, a task force, primarily of district staff, but some community members, came together and they looked at what our recommendations might be for our next steps in our school district. And at the time, they found there were some options to consider. Maintenance on the buildings were becoming relatively challenging in some of our sites, and we had some ideas of what we could do in terms of remodeling or building a new building. And as we moved into 2020-21, those ideas continued to be discussed and percolated, and of course we were working through a pandemic and some economic uncertainty at that time, so we did not come to a conclusion at that moment, but a lot of discussions have been made. So if you go to the next conversation there, so where are we right now in the last 5 years? So we have lots of data points. I think we're honest, we can say to ourselves, the decision is not finalized. We don't really know where we are. We're not certain where we're heading as a facility plan, but we know we have lots of information. We have community surveys that we've done over the years. We recently did an enrollment study, so we know what the next several years of enrollment looks like in Waseca Public Schools. Taken feedback from the board, some community questions and concerns through our discussions over the last few years. We've looked at in depth about tax impact and what our timing could look like for considerations of any kind of larger facility decision, particularly the high school bond and the 2030 step down of that particular current bond payment that might open up some capacity without putting too much additional burden on our community. So we've talked about those things in the last few years. And we know that the options may have evolved over time. What we were presenting in 2020 does not look the same as what we might decide based on how our community has evolved over the last 5 years. And so I think that the calm and measured patience of this process is serving us well in terms of landing on that next long-term facility plan for our district. So what are the challenges of long-term facility maintenance, in the district, but also statewide? So we know that each year the district has to submit a 10-year plan to the state. We do that in July. That'll come to you next month. You approve it annually. And we plan what the next 10 years of long-term facility maintenance look like. The annual funding is not sufficient for all the recommended maintenance. Our district is roughly $750,000, give or take in a year, depending on how that looks for all the formulas that are calculated on that enrollment and free and reduced and those sorts of things. But that's not going to be enough to do everything every year. We know that that's the way it goes, which means that we do have several projects that are just unable to be funded in the current plan. So we end up pushing those things back like we all do with our budgets in our home and our businesses. We budget accordingly based on what the revenues look like. And the image on the bottom there is just kind of what you'll see each year coming through the long-term facility maintenance plan. So that's kind of the overhaul. If you go to the next one, this is more of here's the details in Waseca. What are we working through in our 10-year LTFM plan? Well, we know we have some time-sensitive roof warranty renewals coming up in the next 3 to 5 fiscal years, where we've got some roofs that need to be redone in order to renew their warranties. If we don't redo them, the warranty, we would be forfeiting them, and we'd have to make some decisions about that. Those costs alone eat up essentially all of our LTFM dollars and then some on those particular fiscal years. So 3 out of the next 5 fiscal years, it would be roofing and roofing only, and we still wouldn't probably have enough in our current model. The legislature did make some decisions on that recently that we can look in our long-term financial plan about board authority, some levy authority you've got on those roofs now as of this legislative session. But right now, they're LTFM work that we have to think about. We know, just like many districts in the state, we have insufficient funding for identified needs. We can't do everything all at once. What you'll notice, particularly those of us who have looked at the LTFM plan for a number of years, is there's a column on the right that had been in the past called unbudgeted. Lots of projects that have been there for as long as I've been here and then some have been sitting in that unbudgeted column because there's no way to work them into the plan. However, now it's been long enough that we're not sure if they're even a priority any longer. If we haven't needed to do them in the last several years, why are they still on our plan if they don't need to happen, right? Or what's the long-term plan of those? In the last few years, Mr. Jensen and his team, there's new needs have arisen, whether it's a leak at the high school that needed to be addressed, or some ceiling work here at Central. There's things that arise that may be more urgent than others, things that are on the plan. And so that last bullet point is really the point of today's takeaway is that we don't have current information, and that makes it difficult for us to prioritize some of the projects that we have on our current plan. We have a very, very skilled facilities team, but they're not mechanical engineers, and they're not in the place to be able to tell us commercially what this facilities status is without some of that professional support that we're looking at. And so, to kind of summarize those last few slides, we have lots of information, but we're missing that current building, condition assessment when you think about it that way. So if you go to the next one, Amy. So what's important? Why would we update that assessment? What does it help us do? Well, it would help us, first and foremost, complete the 10-year LTFM plan. That's a plan that has sat relatively, for lack of a better word, it's been annually updated, but not really refreshed in a number of years. So we were uncertain of what's going to happen next with our buildings. So kind of just pushing things off that we don't need to, staying within our budget. But we know we're going to have to do something. We potentially could have to do something larger than a 1-year LTFM budget if we're going to really invest in those buildings going forward. That's the second bullet. The long-term facility decisions of do we remodel a building? Do we consolidate our buildings? Do we add a building? All those things, that assessment data will help us inform that. Because if we find out that the remodel cost of one of our buildings is to a 70% of the replacement cost of that building, we have some decisions to make. But if it's only we could fix everything for 20% of replacement costs, and we know that's an easy decision. Let's get that fixed and let's move forward. So that facility update the assessment really could help us make some of those decisions. These are things that for the last, you're good, you can go to the next one. For the last several months, the facilities committee has been talking through this process, having some really healthy discussions about why we might need this, why we might not, what we all agree with, what we don't feel comfortable with. It's been, I would say, and Charlie and Scott can chime in here in a moment too, but I think it's been really healthy discussion around whether or not this is a necessary thing. So we landed on a proposal process of finding out, okay, who do we want to work with if we're going to do a facility assessment? And the committee came up with really some key parameters. We want to be efficient with our cost. We don't want to spend more money than is necessary to get the information that we need. I think so the competitive process was a very important part of this decision. We also knew we wanted a thorough building review, which includes proposed project costs. I think that one thing that we've identified, our facility team could certainly go through and say, this is broken, this is the end of its lifespan, we could do this here. But to have that professional contractor, commercial perspective of, so if we have to replace this system, what really would it cost in 2025 dollars versus, that's another issue of the old facility assessment, is those dollars are now well outdated based on current inflationary values as the world has gone. So having an updated model would help us there too. The third one really was probably the most challenging term to work through in this process. Was we didn't want to enter into a long-term contract with any particular vendor. We want the facility assessment, we want the information, we want to shake hands, and we want to thank them for their work and then move forward. Many of our commercial vendors we've reached out to, and this is a very common marketing model, so this isn't anything unusual. We'll do the facility assessment at no cost, but then you're going to contract with us at the first project you're going to do with us, and then we're going to get those costs back in project costs, basically. And we basically went into this process saying we don't want to do that. We want to, if we can, do an a la carte type facility assessment and see where we're heading from there. And that was challenging for our vendors, because that's a little bit different than what their current model usually is. However, we had 5 partners who were willing to present proposals to us. And Scott, would you mind passing that around? Ann and Grant and Dave and Alyssa don't have a copy of that yet. So this was also included in your board packet, in your Google folder, but we did get 5 proposals. We had a conversation around what each of these proposals looked like, and the committee talked about the pros and cons of each of our partners that has presented a proposal. The recommended proposal from ICS ended up being the choice through the committee. As you can see in the second to the right column, that one-time FCA cost, you can see it's an affordable option. It's one of our more affordable options. It has a little bit more to its work than the one right below it. That's why it's not the least expensive option, because it does involve some ongoing support over the first year after the assessment. ICS is also a member of South Central Service Cooperative, which means we're getting a discount for this and some future services because they're part of our service cooperative and they're connected. All of these vendors you see in front of you could have done the work with us, and they're all well established with great reputations. The one that we're recommending we move forward with, this is really a good chunk of their world. This is a lot of work that they do representing school districts in these situations. Quite frankly, it doesn't mean we wouldn't work with some of the others going forward if we wanted to do a project. But right now, for this part of the process, that's the recommendation that we would make. I would say, and Sarah can speak to this potentially if needed, but I would also say when it comes to putting in the effort of wanting to be a partner with us, ICS did the work with the meeting and their proposal and being responsive to our questions right away. Very helpful in their regard. And so there was the process with that. So the committee talked about this a little bit further. Theron's not here tonight, but he and I had about a 25-minute conversation. He gave me his feedback. This is also, he would be comfortable with the committee moving this forward based on our conversation. So the committee was moving that forward for you. So we would recommend this evening when we get to our action items that we move forward with ICS to move forward with a facility proposal or facility assessment. They could get that done for us in the next couple of months. Go to the next one there, Amy. We also did build, even though the LTFM plan won't be approved until July, as part of the overall preliminary budget, Sarah did build the cost for an assessment into our preliminary LTFM for next fiscal year, so that cost is there. So that's where we are for this evening. I wanted to share that with you. We'll get to the action item here in a moment, but I do want to open it up for questions and what is the board's thoughts on this process. Scott or Dave, do you want to add, or Scott or Charlie, you want to add anything?
Well, I know one of the questions I get all the time is, what are we going to do? What kind of buildings are we going to do? Where are we going to go? And my answer is, we don't know yet, And so I can support this type of thing because it's been 10 years ago since the initial one was done, and so life changes in that. And when we look at the bond renewal, then we're sensitive to the bonds, selling bonds, to build buildings because it costs taxpayer money. So, but the bond from the high school is done within 2030. Is that correct?
It steps down. It actually is finished in 2036, but the payment is reduced in 2030 for the last.
So that's kind of the target we're looking at. Maybe it's time to really start thinking. So it's going to take a number of years to get the assessment done. It has to be approved by the community, and so there's lots of things we have to do in between before you open the building. So and there is some time lag on between the time you write the bond or do the bond and the first payments come due. So I think we're in a time frame right now to where we got to really start thinking about what are we going to do and lay down some good strong plans and guide try to help the community understand what the answers are. And of course, one of the things, if we're going to do something with one of the buildings, or if we're going to eliminate one of the buildings, well, at some point we have to quit maintaining, rather than just day-to-day maintenance, So I think it's time to start looking at some longer range plans here. So. Scott?
For me, I think one of the big things that I think we heard both from some people that were in our meeting is that the the annual software subscription is kind of a low cost for something so substantial that they can use going forward. And I think some of the items that were listed and specified in ICSs that were not named or not specified in some of the other ones was kind of a point of, well, what really would they be for costs and cost savings down the road? And I think that's, it was a very overall presentation by ICS, and I think that's why I recommend it.
I have a couple questions. Obviously, looking at the two higher cost ones, they're significantly higher, but looking at just specifically ICS compared to ISG, there's a $6,000 one-time cost difference between the two of those. But when you look at the annual software subscription, it's not specified with ISG. And so I guess my question is there going to be an additional cost there? And is that something that we would use? Because I feel like in any industry, when you're looking at analyzing these things, they'll sell you the bells and whistles, and then that's great, but are you going to use them?
Right.
So
Yeah, so
that would be my question there is, in addition to that one-time cost, then we also have the annual software subscription. And is that a need, or is that something we can track on our own, or?
yeah, good question. So the current 15,000 includes the first year of that service with no commitment beyond that. So then we would decide if we're going to continue with that or
Okay.
after that. And I would say the difference in costs is primarily because we're either in that company's wheelhouse or we're not. So some of these vendors here are more than happy to do this for us, but it essentially means they're hiring someone else to do it. That's why the costs get to be a little higher is kind of how I interpreted the proposals. Whereas ICS and ISG, although ISG doesn't typically do assessments like this, that's not really one of their go-tos. They're both less expensive because it's more what they do. Wold is more of an architect and a building type company. They do great work, and they may be the company we circle back to at some point. But for this particular project, that's not really. The other offer seemed to be more appropriate.
I don't know, maybe Jeff, you want to comment? You had some comments on the software maintenance thing that you can add to.
Well, I think that the software would be valuable and something that we would use. What we've lived without it, we track it using spreadsheets and post-it notes with things written on them and things of that nature. So it's kind of moving into that 2025 direction where now you're using a piece of software. So now you can have a maintenance project that needs to be done in the next couple of years, and you can use your mouse and move it around to a couple of different places and see what that looks like quickly and easily. And I think it is something that we're ready for and that we would use. It's pretty intuitive. I didn't see their software specifically, but I've seen some of these types of software, and they're pretty intuitive and pretty easy to use. What we have right now is 4 buildings, 100 classrooms. They all have carpet. They all have ceiling tiles. This is a lot to manage. It's one thing to do a spreadsheet for the LTFM, but that doesn't really get us into specific details of that level. The LTFM plan may indicate that we need to replace some carpets next year, but it's not a comprehensive look at what all 4 of our buildings look like, and we can quickly and easily look at what of those needs to be done. That's kind of what that software would sort of look like.
Sure.
And what it would do.
Software costs, maybe you can consider that software costs will save you time. So we may spend the money on the software time and gain time of people to do other things.
Yeah, and ICS was the one of the 5 who essentially added that into the first year of service, and then we would see what the value would be going forward from there. It's not a very large dollar value. If it's going to be of use to us. If it's not of use to us, we obviously wouldn't want to continue with it, but we could see that going forward. Yeah.
One question, I can maybe assume this, but I should ask, I guess, the two of you as members and Eric as well. Do you think that assessment will answer the things that you listed above that will get us the information that we can help our confidence in making a decision?
Yeah, I think it will, and I think it updates. I mean, it's been 10 years, so I think that update is vital to knowing where we really are today.
What's the time frame on that too? When you have them come in, like when once we choose, when does that all start, and how long does that all take?
Typically within 90 days, we'll
Okay.
have some information. Yeah, it's pretty quick.
And then how long would you say that assessment is maybe valid or current? Is it a couple
Yeah.
of years or?
I think it all depends on how you maintain it going forward. So I think that's what Jeff was referring to. If you're able to manipulate in a system, either with a partner or with software, or however you choose to do it, if you're able to keep that up to date, then it could last, quite frankly, indefinitely. If you don't do anything with it except look at it, make a plan, then put it away, then it probably goes outdated in 10 years again. Because it's just, because they just, otherwise you have to revisit everything. But some of the LTFM planning tools I've seen, yes, you add that we replace this in this building, replace this in this building, and then the whole thing just kind of keeps updated. So you don't ever have anything that's out of date. It's always in real time. And so, until you build something new or take something offline, it should remain relatively current.
Was the entire committee on the same page as far as recommending then ICS over ISG? Okay.
Yes. Because they are more into the school setting, where ISG is more in a commercial setting
Sure.
versus a actual specific to school districts.
Okay.
They actually partnered together. This was something Tara and I talked about a little bit yesterday on the phone too. They actually partnered together a lot on
Okay.
a lot of projects, with ICS taking more of some of the representation, this type of work, and then ISG is kind of the project management type work sometimes. So, yeah.
Do you have any experience working with ICS?
I do. When I was in Albert Lee, we worked with them for some projects, and then they've worked on some things when I was in Mankato. So I wasn't directly working with them in that role that I was in, but I know that they've done work in southern Minnesota quite a bit, and my experience has been positive with many of these, but certainly ICS is.
So they're somewhat of a known commodity for you.
But yes, they are.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any other
the
questions?
beauty of this
Go ahead.
proposal, the beauty of this proposal is that this is kind of we're going to get what we want, which is that one time that facility assessment piece, and then it doesn't mean that one of these other partners isn't selected for the next piece is going, like I said that before. Then we have the opportunity to reassess where we have going forward, which is a couple of the partners we weren't able to get that. Didn't really feel that we got that with them. And to your point, to answer your question, we have been, well, I presented to the committee, it was probably early this calendar year. We could remodel this building, we could build a new building, we could do this would all work. Which one do we want to do? Well, at this point, it's, well, which one would we want to do? Because we have our enrollment information, we have all that stuff, and none of that really drives any of those choices. What really drives the choices is what's going to be better for our community. To remodel something, because that cost is more reasonable, or if it's not, do we start with something new? Do we, change our building? Because nothing in our enrollment, nothing in our community information tells us that we have to move kids around, that we have to consolidate, student populations from here to there. The buildings are all operating at capacity. They're doing fine. We don't have a crunch, overflow or empty buildings anywhere. And so what we've learned is we know enrollment's going to be steady. So I do think this is probably a piece to our puzzle that will help us move forward. Yeah. At a relatively low expense.
Any other questions, comments?
Anything you want to add, sir? Very good.
Nope.
Okay, very good. This will come up in our action items later on this evening. Of course, if questions come to you between now and then, we certainly can have that further conversation.
Okay. Sarah?
All right. Financial update. Amy, do you mind pulling up my presentation? So first and foremost, I did not bring 24-25 year-to-date financial report to the meeting tonight. I intend to provide an updated one as we get later into the summer and we get some of those year-end entries recorded, so I can share a more complete picture of our financial year for 24-25. However, I did look at a lot of that data as I was comparing and compiling information for this budget, the 25-26 budget, and everything that we've looked at and talked at in prior months is on track and up to date. So I just wanted to mention that before we jump into the 25-26 preliminary budget presentation. I'll also mention that we discussed the 25-26 preliminary budget in greater detail at our Finance Committee meeting earlier this week. And also as part of discussions at the Finance Committee meetings this spring, we've talked about kind of streamlining and simplifying the budget book and the budget presentation. So what you have, in the board folder and what you're going to see tonight is a different look than what you've seen in the past. I'm hoping that, again, it's simplified and streamlined and easy to interpret and digest, but certainly welcome feedback on that after this meeting for future presentations. All right, first slide. So we're going to dive right into the general fund revenue. This will be consistent on all the slides, where you'll see what is included in the final budget for 2024-25 that I presented earlier in March this year, and then what I am presenting for the preliminary budget for 25-26 in the middle column. And then there's just a difference calculation on the far right side on each slide. So overall, general fund revenues in the 24-25 final budget were about $27.7 million. I am presenting preliminary budget revenue of just shy of $28 million for 25-26, an increase of about $314,000. You can see on that first line for local property taxes that we have an increase of about $138,000. That's pretty simply linked to an increase in property market value within our taxing jurisdiction. The state source line is next, and that's the largest source of the district's revenue is state aid. We're going from about $22 million in the 24-25 budget to $22.5 million in the 25-26 budget, an increase of about $500,000. A couple of things in this category. The state legislature did approve an increase to the general education formula of 2.74%, or $200 per ADM. So that's incorporated in this budget. However, we are also projecting a slight decline in enrollment for 25-26 from where we're finishing our 24-25 year. We had a large outgoing class of graduating seniors in 2025. That's being replaced with a smaller incoming class of kindergartners in 25-26. So the 24-25 budget is based on 1,720 students, while the preliminary budget for 25-26 is based on 1,690 students, or a decrease of 30 ADMs. So that slightly offsets that increase in general education aid. However, we are increasing our state special education aid in the 25-26 budget. That's based on prior year expenditures. And additionally, in this line item, we have about a $200,000 grant. It's new money for, there's so many acronyms in this presentation, so bear with me. It's an MTSS grant, which is a multi-tiered system of support for students. So that's about $200,000 of the state source increase. When we continue down to the federal source line, you see that I'm projecting that to decrease by about $138,000. A bulk of that is the CLSD grant, another acronym. That was what we used for a lot of our READ Act training over the last 2 years. And those funds expired, they expired June 30 of 2025, so next Monday. So as that federal grant revenue drops off, so does our overall federal source revenue. Our other revenue sources line item is kind of a catch-all. This is where we report donations, athletic and activity registrations or gate receipts, other local grants, medical assistance revenue, and interest earnings. I'm projecting a decrease of about $250,000. $100,000 of that is in medical assistance revenue. I'm budgeting for a decrease there to be conservative, but also just based on where we're at with our medical assistant revenue collected to date in 24-25. I'm also projecting a decrease in our interest earnings for the general fund of about $85,000, just based on kind of market conditions and cash flow for the next year. And then the rest of that difference, what's making up the decrease is just some things like donations and student activity events, other things that I don't know with enough certainty to include in this preliminary budget. So it's possible when we come back in the spring of 26 that we'll have some items budgeted for there, but generally I don't budget for those until they're actually received by the district. Okay. The next slide will showcase our general fund expenditures. So you'll note two different categories here. Both are presentations of our general fund expenditures of $29.1 million. However, they're just presenting the expenses in different categories. So the top category showcases our expenditures by program series. Really, it kind of shows expenditures by department or what category they're being spent in. And then the bottom presentation shows expenditures by object series, and it showcases what we're spending the money on. A couple of assumptions to highlight before we dive into the numbers. One, we do have a settled contract for the teachers union, the Waseca Education Association. In that contract settlement for 25-26, we do have an increase to salaries of 4%, some increases to the district's health insurance contribution to the tune of 5%, and some additional TSA match increases. So those are all incorporated into this budget. We don't have settled contracts for all of our other employee groups. We're in various stages of negotiation with certain groups. However, we've kind of mirrored that teachers' contract settlement and the salary line item and the rest of the employee groups just to incorporate some anticipated settlements in this contract. And then the other thing I'll point out is this budget does include the addition of 5 new licensed positions. So 3 reading and math interventionist positions, which are funded with Title I dollars or ADSYS grant dollars. A new EBD teacher at the elementary level to meet some student needs there, and that's funded with medical assistance restricted state aid. And then an MTSS coordinator position, and that's funded with that MTSS grant that I mentioned in the revenue slide previously. And maybe the easiest way to start looking or thinking about those assumptions that are built in is looking at that object series presentation at the bottom. You can see that salaries increased by about $1 million. If you just do simple math of 4% on the $15.75 million of salaries included in the 24-25 budget, that's about $600,000 of that increase. And then if we add those 5 positions, that gets us to the $1 million increase in that line item. The employee benefit line shows an increase of about $500,000. A lot of our benefits, if you think FICA, TRA, PERA, or long-term disability insurance, those are all benefits that are percentage based on the salaries or wages paid. So anytime the salaries increase, you see an automatic increase in those benefits. And then when we incorporate the teachers' increase district contribution for health insurance, and also I did increase our budget for summer unemployment just based on the trend or the history we've seen these last couple of summers. That's what makes up that increase to our employee benefit line. If we shift and look at expenditures by program series in that top presentation, I'll just highlight a couple of the larger categories showing increases. Starting with sites and buildings, you'll note an increase of about $117,000 in this program category. Some of that is that 4% staff salary increase that we talked about, but some of it is also LTFM projects that we have planned or budgeted for 25-26. If we look at our pupil support services, you'll see an increase of about $260,000. About $160,000 of that is related to our transportation contracted services. The transportation contract is also settled for 25-26 at just shy of about a 4% increase. So that's incorporated in there. However, I also looked at some historical data on what we spent on transportation and increased the budget just based on what I've seen we've been paying for our services over the last 3 years. Then we can move on to the special education instruction line, where you do see an increase of about $737,000. Special education instruction is just overall a large part of our $29.1 million expenses. So that 4% increase presents itself in a larger way in this category. However, if you remember, I had talked about we added an EBD teacher. That's paid for with the restricted medical assistance funds. That's included in this category. And we also added that math intervention teacher. Yep, that's paid for with ADSIS funding. ADSIS is an alternative delivery of instruction for students that aren't special education but need some additional supports and services. So there's another grant-funded position that falls in this category. Additionally, sometimes positions shift between these categories just based on the funding source. So, for example, we did have a teaching position at the junior high school that was funded under regular instruction or unassigned grant dollars in 24-25 that we're able to fund with ADSIS dollars just by changing the nature of or the content that they're teaching. So that is not an add to the overall budget, but a shift in the category, kind of amplifying the increase in this category. The other thing that I forgot to mention is I have built in some like cost of living increases into our other services and supply items. If they're known, like for our insurance increases, I set it at whatever that updated invoice or proposal is. If not, I used a 3 to 4% increase to be reasonable with what we're seeing in the economy. Next slide. Okay, so this slide boils down the last two slides into one line each. So our general fund revenue in the preliminary budget for 25-26 is just shy of $28 million. Our general fund expenditures are $29.1 million, which brings us to a net decrease in overall fund balance of $1.145 million. That will take our fund balance from the final budget of 24-25, $8.9 million down to $7.8 million. However, I'll have you note that our unassigned fund balance holds pretty steady. It actually increases by about $18,000 to $4.919 million, which is 21.3% of our unassigned expenditures. So that category does fit within the board policy parameters of 15 to 35% of unassigned fund balance as a percent of expenses. If you move up a couple of lines to the restricted fund balance, you'll see that this is where a brunt of the decrease expenditures over revenues hits. It takes that restricted fund balance category from $2.9 million down to $1.7 million. I'll just make a comment that the district has been able to strategically build up the restricted fund balances in some of the categories, in large part due to that COVID era federal funding that the district, all Minnesota districts received over the last 4 years. That funding expired September 30th of 2024. So as that funding has gone away, then we're starting to utilize these restricted fund balances to support and continue the programming that we are using them for previously. If we move to the next slide, Amy, this gives you a more detailed look at what makes up those restricted fund balances. You can see at the bottom, I'm showing the $2.9 million versus the $1.7 million. I did highlight in yellow some of the categories that are showing a larger decrease. We'll start with the restricted for Area Learning Center. This restricted fund balance houses funds both for the ALC that Mandy Noner and her team run, but also for our after-school programming, our credit recovery programming, and our summer school programming. So those are a great example of programs that have been fully supported and funded by those ESSER dollars or the COVID era grant dollars the past 3 to 4 years. So again, now that funding has gone away, we're moving back to using the restricted aid that we receive specific for that programming to pay for those program expenses. When we move down to the next line, restricted for basic skills, you see a decrease in fund balance of about $425,000. Basic skills is also known as compensatory. So I think that's the term that they use when they've been talking about it at the legislative session this last spring. This funding is used to lower instructor to pupil ratios, teach remedial instruction, or to support some of the social and emotional positions like counselors, social workers, those types of things to help give students the support they need. So again, as we're transitioning away from those COVID era grant funds, we're really thoughtfully using those basic skills or compensatory dollars to support those positions to continue that programming for students. Dropping down to the long-term facilities maintenance line, you notice a decrease of about $150,000. Again, that's just planned projects over the next year. And then we'll move on down to the medical assistance restricted fund balance, where you see a decrease of about $280,000. Medical assistance revenue goes hand in hand and supports our special education programming. So it supplements both the state and federal aid that we receive for special education services provided to students. Next slide. All right, here we're shifting to summary presentations of revenue and expenditure budgets for the district's other funds. So we'll just start at the top with the food service fund. You'll note an increase in revenues for this fund of about $74,000. That's largely in the federal aid category, projecting some increases on reimbursement rates for meals and also some additional or increased participation in our summer programming. When we look at the expenditures for this fund, you'll note that they hold pretty steady and only decreased by about $11,000. The 25-26 preliminary budget does reflect increases for food, milk, and staffing costs. However, if you think back to 24-25, we had some large purchases budgeted, one being a food service delivery vehicle and another being an oven at the junior high school and also at Hartley. So we don't have those large capital purchases anticipated for 25-26, which holds that expenditure budget pretty steady with the increases in the 25-26 budget for food and staffing. Overall, I'm projecting that fund balance will decrease by about $55,000. It's still a very healthy fund balance. You know, we expect the food service fund to be self-sustaining, meaning that it can support its operating expenses by itself without needing any support from the general fund. So that one is, in good shape. If we move on to the community service fund, you'll note a decrease in revenues of about $120,000. This decrease incorporates some changes to contributions that the Community Service Fund is receiving. It also incorporates some decreases to SAC programming or school age care programming revenue, as well as some decrease on projected interest earnings. When we shift to the expenditure line item for this fund, you'll note that it holds pretty steady again. The Community Service Fund, we also have a budget that's incorporating those anticipated contract settlements and salary increases. However, there were other offsetting program expenditure decreases that are holding that overall expenditure line item steady. All in all, we're projecting an increase to the Community Service Fund balance of about $40,000, which will bring that fund balance to about $1.4 million, June 30 of 2026. Again, we look to the Community Service Fund to be self-sustaining without needing any support from the general fund. So we're showing a healthy fund balance there. The Building Construction Fund, this is the fund that held the proceeds from the bonds issued. There's still some funding remaining from the 2017 facility bonds that were issued, specifically for indoor air quality projects. We did budget to spend down those final funds in 24-25 on a project at this building. We are hoping that the work would be done before June 30th, and it doesn't sound like it will be. So at revised budget time, I'll come back with the actual final spend down of those dollars and we'll be done with it. So nothing to show there, but expect it to come back in the spring. Our debt service fund does show a decrease in revenues of about $77,000. A bulk of this decrease is in our levy category. If you think back to my December 2024 Truth in Taxation presentation, I talked about how all districts are required to levy 105% of our principal and interest payments for debt, just in case there are delinquent tax collections from property tax owners. When there's a buildup because people are paying their property taxes on time, then the state does a calculation and reduces our actual levy. So that's what we're seeing here. Expenditures in the debt service fund are very simply principal and interest on our scheduled debt payments and showing a very minimal change year over year. Next slide. All right, so this slide shows our final fund budgets. The top one is the trust fund. So the trust fund holds gifts that the school board has accepted the responsibility to serve as a trustee for. So there are some large gifts that are given. The gifts themselves are permanent, but the interest that is earned on the gifts is represented in the revenue line, and then dependent on the amount of interest that those gifts earn in any given year determines how much we're able to give out to students as continuing education scholarships. So those revenues and expenses hold pretty steady year over year. And then if we look to the custodial fund, so the custodial fund is meant to hold any kind of in and out transactions. It's a flow through mechanism where the district receives funds from an external party and then redistributes them to another external party without any financial benefit to the district. So that we have a few different relationships of this nature in this fund. One are flow through scholarships where someone makes a donation to the district of $1,000, we turn around and we give it out to a qualifying student. That's either for continuing education, or we do have some scholarships that we've received for youth development. So that's a significant portion of this custodial fund, and not much has changed in that budget regard. Another component of this fund is what we have for we're fiscal host for the Minnesota Educators Partnership, which puts on that MEP Summer Institute, which was actually held last week in Owatonna. So the district collects the registrations for people attending that institute, and then we pay the cost of presenters or any other associated cost with that presentation. That's a small portion of this fund, and again, holds pretty steady year over year. The last big component of this custodial fund is that the district has served as the fiscal host for the Waseca County Collaborative for Families for the past several years, possibly even decades. So the district is still going to be a member of the collaborative. However, we're shifting the fiscal host arrangement to Minn Prairie County Alliance. Minn Prairie serves as a fiscal host for the two similar collaboratives for Dodge and Steele County. So it just makes good sense for them to take on that role for the Waseca County Collaborative. So what you're seeing as the decrease in revenues is we're not anticipating collecting any revenues for the collaborative for families. And then in expenditures, I have budgeted that we're gonna cut one check July 1st to Minn Prairie to transfer the cash that we currently hold in our role as fiscal host. So you'll note in that little snip of the fund balance that the restricted for Waseca County Collaborative fund balance goes from $160,000 down to zero. The last item on this screen is the internal service fund, which houses the financial activity for the district's dental self-insurance fund. Again, I'm showing revenues are holding pretty steady year over year, and expenses for claims and administrative fees are also holding pretty steady. However, I'll just note that we already have engaged in conversations with our insurance consultants about some potential plan changes for the calendar year or the plan year 2026, just to more closely align the revenues with the expenses in that fund. And that is it for the new budget presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have for me.
No quiz?
Do you want one? I can write one up for next time.
I just want to, before any board members ask questions, I just want to commend Sarah and the team for putting together a very thorough presentation and a really solid budget for 2025-26. You know, the district made some decisions a few years ago to intentionally build up some of those restricted funds, knowing that with the ESSER dollars coming in, we potentially could use those funds going forward. Those restricted funds are not intended to be consistently growing funds. They're intended to be used for the programs they're intended to be using for. So the fact that we're able to work some of those into this year's budget, maintain a growing unassigned fund balance is pretty impressive based on what some of our districts around us are seeing for not having to reduce any programming for students. It probably is implied, but I will go ahead and say it. You know, we'll have to then look at what the next fiscal year budget looks like. But I feel really strong, really positive about what we have for the next school year and great work. So I will not stand in the way of questions, as you may quiz her, Mr. Dunn. But I feel really confident in the Finance Committee asked some great questions, and we had some great conversation earlier this week as well.
I just think she did a wonderful job. I like the new presentation that she did. It made it more clear on where our dollars are and where we sit. So I thank you.
Thanks.
I think no matter how many times a board member goes through this, you can always learn some new things. I don't know how many times I've been through it, and I still learn new things every time. So, and how you completely understand it, I don't quite get it, but.
I will say at our committee meeting, we hit her with a lot of questions and she answered them all, so thank you.
Sounds like a lot of things you anticipated, but was there anything that was surprising to you or alarming at first? Or
I don't think so. I think there's been a lot of careful planning, and even ahead of putting together this budget presentation, Eric and I had already talked about doing a multi-year financial projection for the upcoming few years, and I think that will be really helpful as we move forward and take this next year to identify any changes that we might need to make. Yeah.
Yeah, I am a little concerned that fund balance is starting to go down, and I'm being on the negotiations committees, that, all our employees, anticipate a increase of some sort, and I see that fund balance dropping. It concerns me a little bit, it's it's 5% this year, and then all of a sudden 5%, and then all of a sudden, we're behind, and so that concerns me a little bit. As to what we can do to shore that up. That's you can dig it down one year, but then that's what's going to happen is that mathematically things start multiplying quite rapidly sometimes when you go into a spiral, and I see school districts are having that problem, that, we're $10 million short or whatever it is than some of the larger districts. And so I'm concerned that we don't want to see that happening here, so we just have to,
Yeah, we've had a very strategic right size work happening the last several years, and that's what we have to continue to work through. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Exactly right. Because the challenge with restricted funds is you can't just use them on whatever you'd like to use them for.
You shouldn't. And you shouldn't.
Right, exactly.
It shouldn't be that way, no.
So the unassigned fund balance is really that's the health of the district, when you think of it that way, on any given year, right? Mm-hmm. But I 100% agree with you. We have to just continue to be planful, and I don't ever want to be the district that has to reduce programming for students because we didn't plan for what comes next. And so I agree with you. We had some pretty intense conversations, I would say, about what this looks like going forward, and I feel good about where we landed. But you're right on. Yeah.
Well, I was just what you just said. I appreciate I'm just going to say a philosophy of right-sizing the ship as we go, instead of kind of kicking the can down the road and then all of a sudden, oh my gosh, like Charlie said, you got to cut $1 million or more. It's better to do what you need to do a little bit at a time. Sometimes it's maybe a few cuts, but it's better to do it that way than to let it go and hope for a better day, and that better day doesn't come, and then you really have to make some big cuts. And I think if you look back at the history of our school system, I won't say that's never happened, but I would say that we've pretty much avoided that most of the time, and I think that's because of good management, good planning, and all that. So thanks for that. Any other questions? No? Well, seeing that we're not going to have a quiz, we'll move on. Let's see. Committee and board member reports. Scott, you want to start us off tonight?
Sure. So we've actually had 2 finance committee meetings since we last had a business meeting. We looked at obviously the preliminary budgets, and we're presenting that tonight. So that was the basis of what we looked at in both of those, and then looking at the little bit of downturn of student enrollment. So that's that one. Let's see, what else did I have? We also had the facilities we've met, and then we're recommending for the assessment, and we're looking at the LTFM plan and the long-term facility decisions that will come in the future. We discussed goals and vision card. Oh, I'm sorry. We also had a superintendent evaluation for the year end, and we discussed his goals and vision card scores. Formal report card will be presented next month. That's all I got.
All right, thank you. Ann?
Sure. So on June 3rd, we had a DAC meeting. We looked at some of the preliminary test results from the end of the year, test scores for mainly the lower grades, but then some higher grades too. We talked about the curriculum and some changes that will be taking place. We talked about everything from conference attendance to student attendance to measuring progress amongst teachers and all of it. So it was a good meeting. We had a superintendent evaluation. That went well, and I'll let Alyssa touch on that when timing is right. And then we also had a policy meeting, and I believe those policies are listed later on. So.
Okay, thank you. Grant?
I also had the same 2 finance committee meetings, which Scott covered well, and a policy meeting that we'll review later. That was it.
All right, Charlie?
Well, I've had, I think, 4 or 5 negotiations, committee meetings, and then which are going along. We're working on it, and with Eric and Sarah's help there, we're kind of moving our way through that. And then, again, I was on the facilities meeting committee with Scott, and we've had a few meetings there, which are moving on. And the presentation was tonight, and so we'll continue with that. So,
Okay.
that's it.
Melissa?
Superintendent evaluation, we went over the year-end update summary. And then you guys all should have gotten an email. I've started to collect those, but looking for those from board members. Also had finance meeting. Scott and Sarah kind of covered all that. And then activities with Joe Hedevar, we reviewed student activity accounts and kind of went over just a recap of the student activities this spring. Lots of moving parts there.
All right, thank you. Recognitions, positive board feedbacks?
I actually don't have anything. I was gone for a week and a half, and I was out of tune.
You're fine. Ann?
Oh gosh. It's just great to see a lot of the kids involved in a lot of summer activities. I've seen the schools busy with lots of different things. Of course, graduation was great. That's it.
Okay, Grant?
Kind of repeat, just congratulations to all the seniors. Thank you to all the teachers who, Eric had a number of messages towards the end of the year, but they they put in a lot of effort, and hopefully most of them are getting a well-deserved break if they've chosen to. And all the community ed activities have been great. There's a community ed play tomorrow and Saturday that people can come out and see, and should be fun.
Charlie?
Well, I've been kind of missing in action here on like some of the others, but it's great to see 153 students graduate this year. That was a great accomplishment. It's a large class, but it was and then plus I was impressed with we had 11 or 12 ALC students that graduated.
I
Correct?
think it was 12.
12, yeah. So that's our product for the year. We got a bunch of kids ready to go out into the world. Should be prepared. Hopefully they've been prepared well. So that's kind of a highlight, I think. So okay. Listen.
I had a few things. Kalia Satori took 7th in shot put and Tostin Root 4th place at the state meet. Congrats to Brian Roop because he's our new girls basketball coach. So I think he'll do a great job. Jeff and his staff and the custodians working on all those summer projects, redoing gym floors now that the kids are out of the school. So thank you for that. And then, like you had said, volleyball and basketball camps are in full swing. I think there's multiple basketball camps going on this summer, but lots of kids in the school, so that's good to see.
All right, thank you. I was just going to mention the boys and girls track teams too. Multiple kids went on to the state tournament. They did pretty well, so hats off to Dave Abel and his assistant coaches and all the boys and girls that are on that track team. And then I just wanted to mention, since he's here tonight too, Jeff Jensen. I know Jeff has really been working hard since he moved up to the top job with building and grounds, and I know he puts a lot of effort into it, a lot of thought, a lot of time, a lot of work, learning his job, trying to improve things, keep the wheels turning, I guess I'll say. So thanks for that, Jeff.
Thank you.
All right, action items. Motion for item A.
I'll make a motion to approve the awarding milk bid for the 2025-26 school year.
I'll second.
Okay. Motion and a second to approve the milk bid for the next school year. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Motion for item B.
I'll make a motion to approve awarding the bread bid for the 2025-2026 school year.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, motion and second to approve the bread bid for 25-26 school year. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Motion for item C.
I'll make a motion to approve the contract for purchased mental health services.
I'll second that.
Okay. Who do we do that through, Eric? Do you know?
Spiro out of Owatonna, and they serve our students in the summer school therapeutic program.
And we worked with them before, or we continue to work with them?
They've changed names in the last year or so, but it's the same company. Yeah, we've
Okay,
worked with for a
thank
number
you.
of times.
Okay. All in favor of that motion to approve item C, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Motion for item D.
I'll make a motion to approve the disposal of Hartley Library books.
Second.
Okay. Motion and a second to approve item D. All in favor of that motion, say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Motion for item E.
I'll make a motion to approve the food service agreement with MVAC for 25-26 as presented.
I'll second that.
Okay. Okay, and MVAC is Minnesota Valley Action Council, right?
Yep, which we would know as Head Start for the program here in town, or in our building.
Okay, all right. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Motion for item F.
I'll make a motion to approve the reviewed policies 508, extended school year for certain students and individualized education programs, 526, hazing, prohibition, 527, student use and parking of motor vehicles, patrols, inspections, and searches. 528, student parental, family, and marital status non-discrimination. And 529, staff notification of violent behavior by students.
Okay, thank you.
I'll second.
Second? Okay. Motion and a second to approve the reviewed policies. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Motion for item G.
I move that we approve the 2025 facilities assessment that we discussed here tonight.
Second.
Okay. Motion and a second to approve the 2025 facilities assessment. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Motion for item H.
I'll make a motion to approve the 25-26 preliminary budget.
Second it.
Okay. All in favor of the motion to approve item H, next year's preliminary budget, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Motion for item I.
No motion, you just need to
Oh, yeah.
acknowledge that this is a multi-year contract, so acknowledging that we're continuing with the MC for, yep,
Okay,
this year.
okay. Oh, excuse me, I didn't see the acknowledge, okay.
Yep.
Motion for item J.
I'll make a motion to approve the 2024 school year calendar as amended.
Okay,
Second.
Eric, you want to say a thing there?
Okay.
This is the adjustment for our snow days and late starts that we had for the 2024-25 school year. So school was canceled due to weather on February 18th. We had an e-learning day on March 5th and March 19th. And so those are the days that we have to officially report to the state that we still met our minimum number of student contact days, but those days were amended.
Okay. All right, we have a motion, right?
And a
Nope.
second.
Yep, okay.
Yep.
All in favor of the motion to approve item J, say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Motion for item K.
I move that we approve the cancellation of the July 3rd work session.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any comments there, or?
No, I feel with just the frequency of our meetings between this week and next week and the holiday upcoming, it's logical to move forward, meet again on July 17th.
Okay. All in favor of the motion to approve cancellation of our July 3 work session, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Approved, received donations. Let's see what we got here. Look at those.
I'll make it motion to approve the received donations.
Okay,
I'll second that.
okay. Motion and a second.
You want to read them, Dave?
Yeah, list them.
Yeah, I'm seeing. Do you want to read them, Melissa?
Yeah, $20,000 via Cat Diesel Engines for Ag Small Engine Class from Ziegler Cat, $500 from Hertz Farm Management for a student scholarship, and $6,000 from the Waseca Youth Football League to support our local team.
Yeah. The Cat diesel engines, is that something we go after, or is that something they come to us and say, hey, we can do this for you?
I think it's just an ongoing conversation, what we'd like to do with our courses with our students, and when that comes up, they're able to support us for that able. So it's not a one-time conversation, it's an ongoing discussion, and then when they have the opportunity to support us,
Okay,
very, very grateful for that.
okay.
Generous.
Roll call vote. Amy?
Alyssa Bowers,
Yes.
Scott Demmel,
Yes.
Ann Hargan,
Here.
Grant Shepherd,
Yes.
Charlie Reed,
Yes.
Dave Dunn.
Yes. Item M, acknowledge Clifton and Larson Allen as the audit firm for the fiscal year 2025. And finally, a motion to approve item N.
I'll make a motion to approve the substitute rates for the 25-26 school year.
I'll second that.
Okay, any comments there? Or?
Comment I would just make is that we did make an adjustment to our teacher substitute rates for this current school year we just ended. So the recommendation would be then to maintain that, and then we would look at it again for the next school year. We did increase many of our substitute roles that are hourly employees, but with the teachers, we try to do that maybe every other year or so to keep up to speed with that.
Okay, all in favor of the motion to approve item N, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. No meeting then till the 17th of July. We will have another regular board meeting like this evening. Just one reminder, we've got a sheet out, an email about working at the fair booth, if you can. I don't know, Ann, I don't know if you know. Do you know about that?
No.
Okay, the school has a booth at the fair.
Okay.
And what we try to do is to have, school board members, administrators, I don't know, teachers, sign up for a 2-hour shift to be there and just to kind of take care of that booth and answer questions and say hello and pass out candy to kids and
Maybe sets it up.
yeah.
I would add that we have in the past run short, and we're last trying to kind of figure it out. So if you could maybe by the end of the weekend or so, take a look at your calendars, and if those could be filled in by board members by maybe early next week, that gives myself and Amy time to make sure that all of our shifts are covered. I'd appreciate that, just because we know you can't be everywhere. Sometimes you're gone, and same thing with our administrators. So if we're able to get at least we know you filled in what you can, and then I can move on to the next stage. We don't have to bother you. We'll just keep moving on. So thank you for your help. And Amy does a fantastic job setting that up. You'll just get to show up and talk to people. It's a pretty fun couple hours. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Okay.
Second it.
Second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.